The courtroom's stale air hung heavy as Earl Danner 72 sat frozen, while a county notice threatened to erase more than just his shed. Flickering fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his worn leather wallet, his last link to a past some wanted forgotten. What happens when respect is the only defense left? Share your thoughts on standing firm when the world doubts you. Earl Danner drank his coffee slowly, watching frost cling to the shed's wooden panels like old memories refusing to fade. The early November chill settled deep into the air, and the bare trees along the creek behind his modest Missouri home stood silent, their branches scratching against a gray sky. The worn-out AM radio hummed softly in the kitchen, filling the room with an old-time country tune that seemed as familiar and steady as Earl himself. He flipped a pancake in a cast-iron pan that had seen better days just like him, but it was a comforting ritual, a way to start the Saturday morning before the frost turned into ice. On the kitchen table lay an unopened envelope, its edges crisp, stamped by the county zoning board. The early sunlight streamed in through the window, but the envelope cast a long shadow darkening the otherwise bright morning. Earl's eyes lingered on it longer than he intended. He didn't want to face whatever news awaited inside, but he knew that ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. Outside the backyard shed stood like a silent sentinel beside the creek, a weathered structure with peeling paint, its wooden panels holding decades of stories. To Earl, it was more than just a shed. It was part workshop, part memorial. The place where he fixed things, built things, and remembered things. A piece of his past and perhaps the last link to the life he had shared with Roy, his wartime best friend. The doorbell rang softly, breaking the quiet. Earl shuffled to the door, pulling on his worn slippers. It was Maggie Thompson Roy's widow, carrying a small jar of homemade peach preserves, the smell of ripe fruit and summer sunshine filling the air as she stepped inside. At 68, Maggie carried the same quiet strength Earl admired, with warm eyes that betrayed years of hardship, softened by friendship. They sat at the kitchen table, the radio now playing a brief obituary for Roy, marking the passage of time in the town that had changed so much since those war days. Their conversation drifted naturally, touching on old memories, the town's slow decline, and the uncertain future that seemed to creep closer with each season. "I brought you some preserves," Maggie said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of the jar. Roy always said nothing tasted sweeter than peaches from the old Thompson farm. Earl smiled faintly, the weight of years settling in his chest. He had good taste, that one. Their quiet moment was soon interrupted by Earl's reluctant fingers breaking the seal on the envelope. The formal notice inside accused him of having an unauthorized structure on his property and summoned him to a hearing. His heart sank as he read the cold, bureaucratic words. Maggie's face tightened when Earl mentioned the name Janet Kroll, the ambitious local official who had made a reputation for herself by enforcing rules with an iron fist. "That woman has a gift for making veterans feel small," Maggie warned, her voice low but steady. Earl folded the letter carefully, his hand trembling just a fraction, a subtle sign of the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. The shed, that quiet refuge of memories and hard work, was suddenly at the center of an unexpected battle. As Maggie turned to leave, she paused by the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "That shed holds more than wood and nails, Earl. You'd better hold your ground." Outside, the frost began to melt slowly under the rising sun, but inside Earl's heart a chill lingered. The quiet life he had built was about to face its reckoning, and he was determined not to back down. The morning carried on with the familiar sounds of the small town, waking up the distant hum of a pickup truck, a neighbor's dog barking the occasional clang of a hammer somewhere down the road. Yet for Earl, the day had already changed, marked by a letter and the looming presence of a woman who didn't know the value of quiet strength. He took another sip of coffee, glancing at the unopened drawer where his medals rested untouched but not forgotten. The radio played on the voice recounting Roy's life, a testament to friendship and sacrifice. Earl's gaze drifted back to the shed, its frost-covered panels reflecting the morning light, a symbol of resilience, and soon a battleground for respect and recognition. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Earl Danner was ready to stand firm not just for himself, but for the memories held within those wooden walls. The courtroom was half empty, but every scrape of a chair echoed like a judgment. The air smelled of old paint and floor wax, a faint scent of faded patriotism that seemed stuck in time. Earl Danner sat quietly near the front, his fingers folded in his lap, his eyes steady despite the chill that crept beneath the courthouse walls. It was Veterans Day, November 11th, 2024, a day meant for honor and remembrance. But in this room, Earl felt far from either. Outside, the faint sounds of a small parade lingered, marching boots, a distant brass band, cheers for veterans. Inside the courthouse was cold and indifferent, with faded flags hanging limp on the walls, their colors dulled by years of neglect. The benches were worn, the paint peeling, and the murmurs of the few attendees mixed with the rustling of paper. Janet Kroll stood at the front, her sharp blazer pressed perfectly, her expression polished with the practiced coolness of political ambition. She paced slightly as she addressed the room, her voice crisp and unyielding. "Mr. Danner, this shed on your property is in violation of county zoning codes. It's an unauthorized structure." Earl met her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "It's just a place to remember my friend." His words hung in the air, simple yet heavy with meaning. Janet narrowed her eyes. "Is it public or private? A structure or simply a shed? Have you considered if it poses a safety hazard to the neighborhood?" The courtroom fell silent except for the faint scratch of Janet's heels against the floor. Maggie Thompson sat a few rows back, her face tight with worry. She glanced at Earl, but he gave her a slight shake of his head, no interference. Janet's tone grew sharper, her words cutting through the quiet. "And on Veterans Day, no less. Are you exploiting the occasion for sympathy?" Earl's jaw clenched. Frustration flickered behind his calm exterior. He opened his mouth to reply, then paused, considering the weight of the moment. The room's chill seemed to seep into his bones, threatening to freeze his resolve. Suddenly, the courtroom door creaked open. Heads turned, conversations halted. A tall man entered, his uniform impeccable despite the faint weariness in his eyes. He moved silently to the back row, his presence commanding yet understated. No one noticed him immediately, not Janet, not the court clerk, Cole Marner, who busied himself with papers. But Earl felt the shift in the room's atmosphere, a subtle change that held promise. Janet faltered for a moment, her confident demeanor shaken. She mispronounced Roy's last name during her questioning, a small but telling slip that exposed her disconnect from the very community she claimed to serve. In the quiet, an elderly spectator nearby dropped their cane. The sound echoed softly, but no one moved to help except Earl. He stood and offered his hand steady and sure. The mysterious man in the black coat watched silently from the shadows, his gaze fixed on Earl. The courtroom buzzed with tension, but the arrival of this unknown figure brought a new layer of hope and uncertainty. As the session continued, the presence of the general, still unnoticed by most, loomed like a silent guardian. The battle over the shed, over memory and respect, was just beginning. No gavel sounded, no words were spoken. But when the general saluted, the entire room fell still. The courtroom, an old chamber smelling of faded paint and polished wood, held its breath. Sunlight filtered weakly through the frost-speckled windows, casting muted patterns on the worn floor. Outside, the faint sounds of a Veterans Day parade had faded, leaving behind a heavy quiet that seemed to settle deep into the hearts of those present. Janet Kroll, mid-40s, with a sharply pressed blazer and the sharp eyes of someone used to control, was in the middle of her aggressive questioning when movement at the back of the room caught everyone's eye. A tall man, his frame straight and steady despite his age, rose slowly from the shadowed bench. His uniform, pristine even after decades, bore the insignia and medals of a decorated military career. General Marcus Bell had arrived. The room's tension grew thick as the general approached Earl Danner's seat. Without a single word, Bell halted before the veteran. His face was calm but carried the weight of a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Then, with deliberate precision, he raised his hand in a military salute. The gesture was simple, silent, yet powerful, a language understood without words. Suddenly the room seemed to freeze. The scrape of a chair, the cough of a spectator, even the ticking of the courthouse clock paused. Then, one by one, several older men, also veterans, stood from their seats. Their movements were slow but purposeful as they returned the general's salute. Their eyes, lined with years of memories and battles fought, shone with shared respect. Janet's confident facade cracked visibly. Her mouth opened to speak, but no words came out at first. When she finally found her voice, it trembled. "Who is he?" she demanded, her usual sharpness replaced by uncertainty. Cole Marner, the young court clerk who had watched quietly from the sidelines, leaned in toward Janet and whispered, "General Marcus Bell. Retired. A legend in this town, especially among veterans." Bell nodded once to Earl, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes about their bond, a brotherhood forged in the fires of war and years of friendship. Without another word, the general turned and exited the room, his footsteps echoing like a solemn drumbeat. The effect was immediate. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted palpably. Janet, once the commanding force in the room, now appeared diminished. Her attempts to regain control faltered. She stumbled over her words, backpedaling, trying to refocus the hearing, but failing to regain the authority she had wielded just moments before. Earl sat quietly, the weight of the moment sinking in. He glanced at Maggie Thompson, who sat nearby, her hands clutching something close to her heart. Tears glistened in her eyes, but a gentle smile softened her lips. "They remember," she whispered, holding a faded, unopened letter one Roy had penned years ago, but never shared since his passing. Meanwhile, unnoticed by many, a young student in the back raised a smartphone, quietly capturing the scene. The general's salute, that simple yet profound act of respect, was soon to ripple beyond the courthouse walls, shared and reshared on the town's local Facebook page, becoming a symbol of honor, solidarity, and the unspoken strength of those who served. In that silent moment, the courtroom spoke volumes. Earl's dignity, once questioned and undermined, was now shielded by the invisible armor of respect from those who knew him best. The battle had shifted from legal jargon to something deeper: recognition, honor, and a community refusing to forget. Janet sat back, defeated not by evidence or law, but by the unyielding respect of those who truly understood the price of service. Earl, for the first time in the hearing, felt a quiet strength rise within him. The fight was far from over, but the tide was unmistakably turning. The courthouse steps were crowded now, not with protesters, but with veterans wearing medals they'd long tucked away. Late November mornings in Missouri had a crispness that whispered of approaching winter, yet carried the faint warmth of community gatherings and familiar traditions. Thanksgiving was nearly upon the town, and subtle signs of the holiday decorated nearly every window pane, wreaths made from pine boughs, flickering candles, and hand-painted turkeys clinging to glass. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples drifted through the air, mingling with the ever-present chill that urged passers-by to wrap scarves tighter. Inside the town's beloved diner, a sanctuary for many, the atmosphere was alive with quiet but fervent conversation. Earl and Maggie sat in their usual corner booth, the worn leather seats creaking softly beneath them. Earl's hands wrapped tightly around his steaming mug, the dark coffee cutting through the morning cold. Maggie's eyes shone with a mixture of pride and concern as she listened to the murmurs of veterans nearby. These were faces weathered by years of service and life's hardships, men and women who had long set aside their uniforms, but carried their stories etched deep in their souls. They wore medals pinned to jackets that had seen better days, symbols of battles fought and comrades lost. Around them, younger townsfolk leaned in, captivated by tales of sacrifice and resilience, bridging a generational divide with respect and curiosity. The jukebox in the corner hummed softly, playing classic American tunes from the 1940s and 50s, the soundtrack to many of these veterans' youth. Plates of warm pie and mugs of rich coffee moved from table to table, the scent blending with the lively chatter and the comforting clatter of dishes. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Janet Kroll sat in a cramped office with city officials, her frustration simmering beneath a veneer of calm professionalism. The meeting was tense. Reports of growing support for Earl had spread through town like wildfire, fueled by the general's silent yet powerful salute and the viral video circulating on social media. Janet's carefully laid plans were unraveling faster than she could contain. She frowned as she sipped her lukewarm coffee, plotting her next move. This battle was no longer just about a zoning dispute. It had become a public relations crisis threatening her political ambitions. She needed to regain control swiftly and decisively. Back at Earl's home, the mailbox offered a quiet reprieve. Amid the usual bills and advertisements lay several anonymous letters. Their carefully penned words filled with heartfelt encouragement. "Your courage is a beacon for all of us," one letter read. Another, "Thank you for standing tall even when it feels like the world turns its back." A young local reporter, having stumbled upon the story via social media, had reached out to Earl, eager to share his narrative with the respect and dignity it deserved. Earl was hesitant but knew the truth needed to be told not just for himself but for the entire community. In the cozy living room, Maggie sat knitting quietly, her fingers moving rhythmically as she spoke softly of Roy's generosity and kindness. "He had a way of making everyone feel seen," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "This town was better because of him." Their conversation wove a tapestry of memories that wrapped around the diners and veterans alike, reminding everyone that behind the conflict was a shared history and a collective heart. As Thanksgiving neared, Earl felt the weight of the coming speech settling on his shoulders. The thought of addressing the town stirred a mix of anxiety and determination within him. He knew the words needed to be simple but sincere, a tribute to Roy and a quiet stand for justice. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast golden hues across the town, Earl and Maggie returned to the diner. The veterans had begun to gather more visibly, donning their uniforms and medals with a quiet pride. Conversations buzzed with renewed energy and solidarity. Younger community members joined in, eager to listen and support. The diner was alive with the smells of freshly baked pumpkin pie, spiced cider, and brewing coffee. The jukebox switched to a gentle ballad, filling the room with a comforting sense of belonging. Conversations turned to gratitude, sacrifice, and the meaning of community in uncertain times. Outside, Janet lingered near the diner's entrance, a shadow in the fading light. She overheard a group of locals discussing the old shed. "That old shed's more than wood." "It's a symbol now," one woman said, her voice steady and clear. Janet's eyes narrowed, a cold realization settling in. The dispute was no longer just about a structure. It was about identity, respect, and the spirit of the town itself. Her political game had grown far more complicated than she'd anticipated. Thanksgiving preparations wrapped the town in warmth and anticipation. But beneath the surface, a storm was gathering. The veterans' quiet gathering, the community's rising support, and Earl's quiet resolve were weaving together into a force that would not be easily ignored. In this small Missouri town, amid frost-touched mornings and familiar traditions, a new chapter was beginning, one where the whispers of the past would become a roar heard far beyond the courthouse steps. Earl's voice trembled only once as he recalled a promise made long ago. The town hall was filled with the warm glow of autumn sunlight streaming through tall windows, casting golden hues over the faces gathered inside. Fall wreaths adorned the walls, pumpkins lined the stage, and American flags stood proudly at the corners. The air carried the faint scent of warm cider and spiced pumpkin, a sensory reminder of Thanksgiving and the community's shared traditions. The room buzzed softly with murmurs from a mixed crowd. Older residents who had seen decades pass, and younger faces curious about the story unfolding. Earl stood at the podium, steady but humble, a weathered man whose quiet presence held the attention of everyone. Maggie sat nearby, hands folded in support, while Janet lingered uneasily toward the back, her gaze sharp, yet uncertain. General Bell remained quietly seated, his calm demeanor offering an unspoken endorsement. Earl began by sharing memories of his dear friend Roy, a man who had taught him the true meaning of community and kindness. His words painted pictures of afternoons spent by the creek working together in the old shed that now sparked so much controversy. He spoke of loyalty beyond appearances, respect earned through deeds, and the invisible bonds that tie a town together. He recounted a promise made on the battlefield, a vow to carry forward the spirit of camaraderie and compassion, even when faced with judgment or misunderstanding. As he spoke, the crowd grew quieter, drawn into the sincerity of his voice and the weight of his memories. Janet shifted in her seat, rising to interrupt, but the murmurs of support for Earl quickly drowned her out. The room seemed to lean in collectively, refusing to be swayed by the sharp edges of her objections. Faces around the hall nodded in agreement, eyes reflecting the truth of Earl's message. From the back, General Bell stood, his posture straight and commanding. He nodded approvingly, a silent salute to the courage and grace Earl displayed. Then, a younger veteran standing nearby stepped forward to publicly thank Earl not just for his fight, but for reminding the town of its own values. The atmosphere shifted palpably from tension and division to a hopeful unity. Conversations softened, and the crowd's warmth enveloped the room like a comforting embrace. Earl's smile was quiet but genuine, a reflection of relief and gratitude. As the speech concluded, a standing ovation rose, filling the hall with applause that echoed beyond the walls. For the first time in a long while, the community seemed poised to heal and come together. Meanwhile, back in her office, Janet sat alone, the din of the crowd faint through the walls. Her eyes fixated on a resignation letter lying on her desk, a stark symbol of her slipping grip on power and the shifting tides within the town. The light outside dimmed as the afternoon waned, but inside the town hall, the warmth of shared understanding and renewed respect lingered, promising a future shaped by kindness and the refusal to judge by appearances alone. The creek behind Earl's home shimmered beneath a pale December sun, its waters running clear and steady, reflecting the soft glow of the afternoon light. A gentle dusting of fresh snow clung to the bare branches of trees lining the creek, transforming the landscape into a quiet winter tableau. The air was crisp, carrying the faint comforting scent of pine and wood smoke, drifting from nearby chimneys. Christmas lights blinked softly along the porches of neighboring houses, their twinkling colors weaving a subtle tapestry of warmth and hope against the cold. Earl stood by the edge of the creek, his breath rising in small, steady clouds, watching the water flow with a calm that mirrored the peace settling in his heart. Behind him, the old shed, once battered and weathered, stood proud and renewed. Its freshly painted panels gleamed softly in the sunlight, a beacon of resilience, not just of wood and nails, but of the kindness and quiet strength that had carried him through the many trials of recent months. Neighbors began to gather, arriving with dishes and smiles, each bringing a piece of themselves to the small celebration Earl had quietly organized. Maggie appeared beside him, her eyes warm beneath a knitted hat, holding a framed letter carefully wrapped in tissue paper. It was the letter Roy had written before he passed long unopened, now finally given its place of honor as part of the town's shared history. Earl took it gently, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting, memories of laughter and friendship flooding back like a river breaking through the ice. Around them, a festive scene unfolded. The air was rich with the aromas of homemade pumpkin pie, spiced cider, roasted turkey, and fresh coffee mingling in a way that felt like home. The group was a patchwork of ages and stories, veterans wearing faded medals, young families bundled against the cold, long-time residents who had watched the town change through decades. Their voices rose and fell in easy conversation, sharing stories of holidays past, simple acts of kindness, and hopes for the future. The diner's old jukebox played softly in the background, filling the air with classic American tunes that carried echoes of days gone by. General Bell lingered quietly at the fringe of the gathering, his presence steady and unassuming. When he approached Earl later, his voice was calm but full of respect. "You've carried more than just memories, Earl," he said softly. "You've reminded us all what it means to stand strong without losing kindness. There are opportunities ahead, ways for you to lead that go beyond this fight." The promise in his words felt like a warm ember kindling hope for new beginnings. Meanwhile, elsewhere in town, Janet Kroll sat alone in her office. The weight of recent events pressed down on her. She stared at the resignation letter on her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she signed it. The public acknowledgement of her mistakes was difficult but necessary. Her departure marked the end of a chapter defined by rigidity and misunderstanding, opening a fragile path toward healing for the community she had once sought to control. Back by the creek, Earl looked around at the faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns and the fading light of day. There was something unspoken in the way neighbors exchanged glances, a shared understanding that what had begun as a quiet stand had blossomed into a movement of respect, empathy, and connection. His heart swelled with gratitude, filled with a profound awareness that true strength was found not in confrontation or authority, but in kindness, humility, and the willingness to listen. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, gentle shadows over the snow-dusted landscape, a neighbor approached Earl with a hopeful question about how they might extend their kindness further, reaching out to those still struggling in the town. Earl smiled quietly, nodding with a sense of purpose renewed. The journey ahead was uncertain but filled with promise, a new chapter where community and compassion would lead the way. The crisp winter air was alive with the soft murmur of conversation, the crackle of a nearby fire pit, and the subtle scent of pine needles mixed with freshly baked goods. It was a night of healing and new beginnings where the bonds of friendship and understanding had been reforged, stronger, warmer, and more enduring than ever before. The creek flowed on steady and sure, much like the spirit of the town itself, resilient, hopeful, and ready for whatever the future might bring. The gentle winter sun cast a soft glow over the quiet town where memories mingled with new beginnings. Earl's journey showed how quiet acts of kindness rooted in understanding rather than judgment can heal wounds deeper than time itself. Like a flickering lantern in the night, unconditional goodness lights paths through life's darkest moments. As we move forward, perhaps we might pause to see the unseen kindness around us ready to be returned in ways that touch hearts and build community. If this story has warmed your spirit, consider sharing that warmth with someone who might need it most today.